Your Highness, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and welcome to this next session here at the Arab Media Forum, where we are talking about technology and trust in the media. My name's Richard Dean. I'm a presenter with the Arabian Radio Network, the Business Breakfast Show, and it's my honor to be the moderator of this next session. So without further ado, let me welcome my guest this morning. He is the president and the managing director of CNBC International, Mr. John Casey. Thank you. John, please, thank you. Thank you. So let's talk about the role of technology in media, because I'm old school when it comes to media. I remember newsrooms where people like you and I would sit around and argue about the stories. And I'd say, we should lead with Apple iPhone launch today. And you'd go, no, there's an Emirates Airlines story. Yep. And Her Excellency Mona would say, no, it's the visa story's the big one today. And we'd all have a big conversation, yep. And then the editor would decide. But now we're getting to a stage where data science and algorithms are having an influence in the newsroom. Talk me through that trend.
Sure, absolutely. Firstly, though, can I just say thank you to the Arab Media Forum for the invitation. You put on a really good show here. Happy 20th birthday. And also thank you for your highnesses and your excellencies for making me feel so welcome. So technology has always been at the heart of helping us determine what the stories are and how to think about our editorial. As technology has advanced, the tools at our disposal to make those decisions become more informed. But at its heart, when we think of figuring out editorial priorities at CNBC, we think about it in the following way. Our principal story is the market, is money, is the cost of money, and what that does to assets and securities. And the market, we perceive, whilst not 100% right, tends to be the smartest guy in the room. The most money and the most brains are considering what they do in terms of reacting to news and stories and how that then creates price discovery, which affects markets. And we use technology to tell us and to inform us what the market is saying. Once we know what the market is saying, that's when the old school editorial judgment kicks in. And you absolutely still require that. You still require smart journalists with a lot of experience making decisions. But our foundation level is to use technology, to use machines, in some cases to see what's trending, in some cases to see what people are talking about. But we use a number of different diagnostic tools to identify what the market thinks the priority is, and from that can then inform our editorial.
So CNBC International, which you run, is, to my mind, a media company, whereas Reuters and Bloomberg, which I both worked for, yeah, were essentially data and information companies. I mean, even 15 years ago, when I was at Bloomberg, we were looking at interest rate decisions and looking at nanoseconds of that decision being made, how to get the information up there, because people were doing real-time trading and algorithmic trading. And of course, that has moved on since then. So how do you approach that?
We are unambiguously a business news network. We are a niche within a niche. We know precisely the lane that we have. Our principal constituent in terms of consumption is investors and people interested in business. And so when we think about all of our endeavors, whether they be editorial or commercial, we think about it through that lane. Our general job is we aggregate the most influential and affluent audience. What we then do on the business side is package that up and then sell it on. When we think of the other agencies and networks that you've spoken about, those are machines. They are agencies. They are big organizations with a specific goal. One is to sell terminals. The other is to sell terminals and agency material. We don't do that. We, in fact, use agency material in the case of Reuters, and so they're a partner, and we're a client of theirs. But what we are there for is for media, and we use our media to deliver business news, and we are effectively a bunch of humans, as opposed to a machine, focused very much on telling the story of the day.
So in terms of technology and how it's being used now and how it will be in the future, let's take that fictional argument that we're having in the newsroom, where I'm saying we should lead with Apple's iPhone launch, you're saying we should lead with the Emirates Airlines story, and Her Excellency Mona's saying we should lead with a story about green and golden visas in the UAE. How does technology play a role in that decision?
So first of all, we have used technology, and in particular, we have used our website's data to inform what we think core is. We have lots of different data sources, quantitative, qualitative, from TV, from social media, but the one that we put at the top of the food chain is our digital CNBC.com data. The reason is it's completely owned and operated, and it's 150 million unique visitors a month, which makes it one of the biggest news websites in the world. From that data, we then study and interrogate it to figure out what does our audience want. What they want is what we have called and termed core. Core is the following 5 things. It's macro markets, it's business, it's technology, it's geopolitics, and it's China. I think the first 2 would be obvious for CNBC, and I think increasingly technology is obvious. What might feel slightly less obvious is geopolitics being the 4th and China being the 5th. I'll just explain them quickly. Basically, since the middle of 2016-17 with Brexit, Trump, the correlation between politics and money has become tighter and tighter, and as a result, it's become part of our core. China, as the engine of growth for much of the last 15 years, is something that CNBC audiences just come to us and have a voracious appetite for. We've identified those 5 as core using technology and data. We know that 70 to 80% of both our usage and our consumption and engagement comes for us for one of those 5 topics. So we then use that hyper-targeting to inform all of our decisions. Every guest that we book, the questions that we ask, the events that we attend, even the straps that we create on our graphics has to be mindful of core, because we know if we veer off those core topics, then there is only 2 to 3%, 20 to 30% of our audience that would be as engaged, but by definition, 70 to 80 that is not engaged. So if you're in our rundown and you want to delight your audience and delight your readers, you have to think about it in the context of what the data tells us our audience wants.
So those are the 5 broad topics, but within the treatment of those topics, you and I were chatting a couple of days ago, and you said it's really important. And you started in editorial, didn't you?
Yes.
You're a business
Yes.
executive now, but your
Yes.
background is editorial. You need to delight the audience. You need to do something that a robot could not.
I think in the scenario that you painted of having editorial judgments and decisions, I think you need to, once you have equal weighting or moderately equal weighting, you then need to go with what's most compelling. So if the story that you also had Tim Cook as an exclusive behind it, or if the story that Excellency Mona had also had the most compelling pictures that no one had seen behind it, or if the story that I had a piece of research attached to it that we thought was going to move a market, then the one that's got the most associated production element that adds value to the story would be the story that wins. And when you think of composing articles, or you think of composing products, or a live TV rundown, you have to think about it in the context of delighting your audience with whatever that you've got. I would say for business news, the top of the hierarchy is moving assets. If you're consuming business news, the chances are you're vested. The chances are you have money deployed in the market, and every single second, based on what we are reporting on CNBC, assets are rising or falling in value. If you have a story, if you have a piece of material, if you have an interview, a soundbite that is going to dislocate the price by injecting something in the public domain that wasn't already known, which makes people buy that asset, or in the case of my currency, sell that asset, then that is what wins the story in terms of the editorial judgment.
Let's talk about Arabic language content, which CNBC has embraced for many, many years now. And you've spent your most, if not your entire career with CNBC. You
Correct.
spent a lot of time in Asia, in this region, and in the United Kingdom, the United States as well. But Arabic has always been very, very important to you. Why was that decision taken? Maybe if you can take us back to that moment many years ago. And then what's the future of Arabic language content?
So we have a really impressive footprint here in the region. We've got CNBC Arabia, who are here at the Media Forum and who are here every year. That's an Arabic language business news service. They'll be celebrating also their 20th birthday next year. So they've been around and been on the block for a long time. And they do what we do, but from a locally specific perspective, i.e. they gather news from this region, they tell stories about these markets, and they bring the global story to Dubai. What we also have here is bureaus in Dubai and bureaus in Abu Dhabi, and we have a great team here led by Patrick Allen. We have Hadley Gamble, we have Dan Murphy, we have Natasha on the digital side. We have a broad array of journalists in different disciplines that are telling stories about this region and also traveling around the region to tell other stories. And indeed, the biggest stories from here that emanate around the world, like oil, for instance, is something that we cover. So right now, Hadley Gamble's just leaving the defense conference in Warsaw, and she's on a plane to Vienna to attend the OPEC meeting, which is going to be a critical one in terms of what the news that we're going to get there to support the underlying price. We came here because Basically, we are always looking to extend reach, and this is a perfect market for CNBC. It's a market that understands business, it's interested in economics, it's looking for growth. There are many parts of the world that are looking to invest in this region and come to places like Dubai, and there's a significant amount of capital and desire for diversification in this region that is looking for a place to put to work, looking for yield around the world. So in terms of all of our operations here, it just makes sense that we're here.
Can we talk about fake news? How would you define fake news? Because different people have different definitions of it. And what are you doing as CNBC International, to counter fake news?
I prefer the term internet operations, but I think the maligning of information has happened for a long time. I think propaganda is a very old concept, and I think that social media has accelerated it significantly. I revert back to an earlier answer. The market is the smartest guy in the room, and the market may fall foul of fake news, but will correct itself shortly thereafter. We focus exclusively on money and markets, on economics and business, and our belief is that you need to take sourcing incredibly seriously. You need to consider where you're getting your information from. We take extreme pride on making sure everything that we publish has been verified and is checked. But we're human, as I mentioned, and we make mistakes, but we're very quick to own our mistakes and correct it. I think we are doing what everyone's doing, which is trying to just ensure the authenticity and the source of the information that comes into our newsrooms has been stress tested, and the best way of stress testing it is the market. Now, there are some assets and stories that say crypto, which are harder in traditional ways to use the market to stress test, and then it's good old-fashioned journalism. We have teams that verify video, that verify information, that verify data. We often look at the correlation between a piece of data and a market movement, and if there's a correlation that doesn't make sense, our experts will know that, and then that's another way of rooting out fake news.
How do you pick talent?
We look for predominantly, the number one trait when I'm hiring, talent or otherwise, is integrity. That's the thing we live and die on. We will be forgiven for being second on a breaking news story. We may be forgiven for not having the most beautiful set. We will not be forgiven for journalists who are charged with telling our audience what's happening with money and markets if they lack integrity. So the first thing I look for in terms of their CV, in terms of their track record, in terms of the conversation, in terms of the references, is the rigor that they apply to the truth and doing the right thing. The second thing I look for is interesting people. People who are curious, people who are well-read, people who are keen to learn and to be in learn mode, even if they're a veteran, because we find that those people have the best conversations and have the most interesting perspectives. We quite like people with strong presentation skills. Many of our journalists are on air for 3 or 4 hours, like yourself. Many of our journalists have to jump on air in hot or cold conditions after being on a plane for 16 hours. And if they speak well, and if they can walk well, and if they can articulate messages, then that makes them an attractive hire. But I would say that's absolutely third fiddle to integrity and being a really smart, curious, interested person.
Let's talk about a phrase that I hadn't heard before, which is machine learning to hyper-target content to consumers. So you talked about those 5 broad areas that you know in aggregate your viewers and your readers like. But in terms of using algorithms, using machine learning to figure out what John likes or Richard likes or who Sarah likes, how do you do that? How do you make sure that you deliver to me or to you the stuff that we really care about?
So we've got 4 revenue streams at CNBC in order: advertising, distribution, partnerships where we license our brand, and going directly to the consumer with a subscription product. We have a couple, a Jim Cramer product and another one called Pro. Take the last one. On the direct-to-consumer product, we use AI and we use machine learning to inform 2 things. One's commercial, one's editorial. On the commercial front, we have a robot figuring out pricing in a dynamic way to ensure that we can retain retention to the greatest possible extent, and we can also get new customers through using smart data and using AI to identify what the correct price point would be in different territories.
So just to confirm, this is CNBC Pro, which is the subscription service where you pay $10-ish a month.
A little more, 300 a year, but yes,
Okay,
it's a subscription product which is very investor-focused. So of the core that I referenced, those 5, much more at the top end of macro markets. Really buy this, sell that. 10 stocks Goldman Sachs says you need to get out of what's happening with Credit Suisse's CDS, that sort of a content proposition. So yes, that's the product that I'm referring to. Another way that we would use it is what we decide from an editorial standpoint and a publishing standpoint to put either in front of or behind the paywall. The judgment that we need to make on what is free, and CNBC.com is entirely free for the users, hence 150 million unique visitors, versus CNBC Pro, which is a moderately premium expensive product, but which has a smaller subscription base, is critical, and playing with what you put before and after is one of the things that we use AI in.
In terms of subscriptions, I'm sure, looking around the audience, loads of us have got subscriptions to various news feeds, right? Or entertainment feeds, whether it's Netflix or Amazon. But I was having a conversation with my wife the other day. She was going through my credit card bill, and she was saying, do you really need CNBC Pro, Bloomberg, The Economist, and the Financial Times? Do you really need all of them? And we've got, Netflix and Disney and blah, blah, blah. There is a limit. Well, I'm not quite sure. And then there's my sport ones, and that's where it really gets expensive.
Yeah, of course.
But you know the point I'm making is that there is a limit to how many subscriptions most of us as punters can have.
I think that the economic challenges that are being felt around the world, driven through how interest rates can combat inflation, is informing our industry very pointedly over peak subscription and peak service. And I think that the consolidation that we have seen at the big end in the streamers and the low end with the premium products is going to continue to play out. And I think that for some time to come, you're going to continue to see a narrowing of the number of offerings. I think in a world of peak subscription, the really critical thing is to know your customer. The most important thing that we focus on is the data in our direct-to-consumer business and understanding how to delight them. Ultimately, you just need to impress your people and make yourself as required as possible. And we do that through just studying consumption and studying what people want.
We've only got a couple of minutes left. Let me ask you a selfish question again. I present a daily radio, TV business news program, so I'm in the same line of work as you. And our mantra at the Arabian Radio Network is ICE. Information, you've got to entertain, and you've got to engage.
Okay.
Fine. How do you strike that balance between information and entertainment? Because they can sometimes conflict, can't they?
They can, but the beauty of what you do and a lot of what we do at CNBC, we operate across all media, but in events like this and on live, long TV shows like yours and like, say, Squawk Box, our flagship show, you've got 3 hours, you've got a whole day to play with. In terms of our hierarchy, I like the one that you use at your network. We put integrity, independence, objectivity, accuracy at the top of the food chain. And regardless of the story, the rundown, the show, that's the most important priority for any of the journalists that are working. Our audience are the most affluent and influential that they could get. The commodity they have least is time, and they are relying on CNBC to be one of the ingredients in making their next business or economic or investment decision. So if we get it wrong, there is an implication to that, and they will not forgive. So that's at the top. That said, my recruitment strategy is, once we've got past the integrity piece, interesting people, fun people.
Hadley's fun.
Hadley's
fun.
box
office.
Hadley is fun. Most of our team are very interesting people to be across at a dinner table because they're fun people. And once you've broken the news or discussed the economic data or looked at the U-turn from the government policy and you've delivered that information cleanly and accurately to your audience in a way that they can then operationalize into, let's say, an investment, if there's a joke to be had, or if there is a humorous moment that we can inject into the broadcast, or if we can have fun with a guest like you are with me on stage at a CNBC event, we're going to do that because we think that makes it compelling. It's not as important as the independence, objectivity of the information and the data, but business news is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And if you're watching a business news network, you're probably going to come for repeat business. And whilst you're getting richer or not getting poorer, it'd also be good if you could have some fun along the way.
Last question. Business TV news is, I would argue, in some ways, a duopoly at the moment. There's you guys, and there's Bloomberg Television. There are others as well. We had Julia Chatterjee from CNN on our show today. Of course, other people cover TV news. Where do you see, we've got about 30 seconds left, where do you see that duopoly evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
Look, we're mostly focused on ourselves, and when we come in the mornings, we look at what we did yesterday and we see if we can better it. We look at our metrics and we can see if we can enhance and improve it. Bloomberg I have a lot of respect for. I consider Bloomberg a machine, and I consider us a bunch of humans. And I think that when it comes to the key metrics, we are first in business worldwide, and we intend to stay that way.
Awesome. John, great fun talking to you. Thanks
so
very much indeed. John Casey from CNBC International. Shukran jazilan.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Your Highness, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. We'll be back on stage.